Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC Guy. Today I want to tackle a subject that I covered in a video a couple of years ago. And I think it's a good idea to periodically update those old videos because things change in the hobby and in the DCC industry, on an annual basis. So I think we'll bring this one up to date. And what I'm talking about is speed matching your locomotives so they run together in consist without any problems. So let's go ahead and move on. But first, let me ask you, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and hit that little red subscribe button. And when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Thanks now. Before we get started with speed matching revisited, I want to briefly go back and give you a little feedback on the last video on using RC filters. Because, I knew this was going to happen. I tried to point it out during the video, but the message just didn't get across to you guys. If you are not having any of the symptoms, any of the problems that I pointed out in the video, then you don't have to worry about installing these RC filters on your model railroad. It's only if you start experiencing any of those symptoms that you should really start thinking about installing the RC filters as a Band-Aid. And if you go to the trouble up front of twisting your wires or using the zip cord or doing really good wiring of the right size and keep your runs to less than 30 feet and keep your amperages down 5 amps or less, then you should not have any problems on your model railroad. And one thing, if you are converting an older DC powered layout to DCC, then that's also a case where you might run into problems. Because invariably, with those older layouts, we used to use much smaller wiring. And that can lead to some problems because you're trying to push a whole lot of amperage through much smaller wires than they were really designed to hold. And that can create a lot more of these waveform deviations and other issues on your layout. But, for the most part though, most of you, if you've done your homework and done it right up front, you're not going to need the RC filters. It's only those cases where you see problems. And then you should take a look at adding the RC filter. And as I said in the video, you only need to place it at the very end of each DCC signal bus power wire run. You don't need to put it right at the command station because they have them built in. Where you need it is at the far end. Now, if you've got 50, 60, 100 foot long runs, then you might need to put an additional one halfway point, something like that. In the end, if you find that your layout is totally hopeless and helpless, you might end up having to rewire. But that's a very extreme case. Most of the time, adding the RC filter would take care of a lot of these issues. Okay, so let's tackle the subject of speed matching. And what I'm talking about when I say speed matching is programming your decoders so that two locomotives can be operated together and will run at about the same speed and will not fight each other as they're trying to pull a train. And it takes a few steps to get two locomotive decoders matched up and programmed so that they will do that reliably. So what I want to do first is run through a list of things that you need to be aware of when you get ready to do speed matching. And then we will tackle the job of speed matching these two locomotives so that they will run together in a consist without any problems at all. Now first I want to run through some tips on speed matching just to get you started on the right foot before we try to actually do a demonstration of speed matching. And so the first thing I want to point out is don't set out to speed match every locomotive in your roster on your layout, because basically they're going to run differently, your decoders are going to be different, and it's not going to be a fun experience for you, and I doubt you'll be able to be successful at doing it. Another thing to be aware of is try when planning your consist to select locomotives that are similar possibly made by the same manufacturer, and therefore they will have the same motors, the same gearing, probably made in the same factory on the same assembly line, maybe at the same time if they are identical locomotives. And that way, you're just going to have a much better chance of speed matching those locomotives successfully. And if you can get them to run at pretty much the same speed on a DC powered track, then once you put a decoder in them and get them running on DCC, or once you try to program them with DCC, I think you're going to find that that'll work a lot better for you. Now, another thing that I think is very important for planning your consist is to use decoders of the same brand, the same version, and that way they're going to operate a lot easier with one another. And one reason for that is the different manufacturers use different approaches to developing the basic speed tables that they use. And then when it comes to actually doing the speed matching and altering the characteristics, the running characteristics of your locomotives using those decoders, you're going to be able to have a much better chance of matching the speeds in the two different locomotives. And that goes also with the different way that they do back EMF settings and all of those type of things that deal with the way that the decoders control the motors in your locomotive. So you're much, much better off to, pick a decoder that you want to use for a consist and buy two of them. And another reason for that is that the different manufacturers offer different functions. For example, Soundtrax has something called F11 braking, whereas the others don't. So you'd want to preferably run Soundtrax equipped locomotives with other Soundtrax equipped locomotives. And the same thing for Loc Sound has some unique functions. TCS has unique functions as well, and all the others. So it's a good idea at the beginning to plan your consist so that you'll be using the same decoders. Now, one thing that's important though is don't overthink this, because it's a fairly straightforward, easy procedure to speed match locomotives. However, be realistic about this, because you're not going to likely be able to get absolutely perfect speed matches with all of the locomotives that you're going to put in a consist. And also, once you get the locomotive speed matched and in a consist and pulling a train, then you're going to find out that other factors come into play, because the locomotives at the rear of the consist are going to take up the weight of the train first, and the front locomotive is not going to be, and then they're going to have to slow down, and then the front locomotive is going to have to slow down some to match them or pull them to match up. So you're always going to see a small amount of bumping and grinding going on as a result of little factors like that that come into play when you're actually running trains with your consisted locomotives. So the big thing out of that, don't overdo it. Don't overthink it. Don't assume that you have to match every speed step digit for digit, okay? Now, there's two different ways that you can go about speed matching. And one I'm going to call the manual method. And what it basically involves is putting the two locomotives on the track together and starting them off both at the same time at speed step 1 and see if they're running at the same speed. And if they're not running at the same speed when you're on speed step 1 on your throttles, then you can go ahead and use ops mode programming to make a change to CV2. And that's the CV that controls your speed at speed step 1. Then once those two are matched up, you can keep going back and trying to do that. Then you're going to want to run them at a much higher speed at the midpoint, either 50% on a Digitrax throttle or speed step 64 on some other throttles, depending on which brand you have. And then when they're running at the mid speed, then you need to try to adjust those. Now that's where it gets difficult, because you're going to have a very difficult time matching those while they're zipping around at half speed on your layout. So that's why I don't recommend this method. And then the next part of this is crank them up to the full speed that your throttles settings allow, and then try to match them at that speed. And at that full speed, you're going to have a very, very difficult, hard time doing it. And that's why I really, as I said, I really don't recommend trying this approach because it's going to give you a headache trying to match those racing locomotives. Now, another method available to you is to set up a measured section of track on your layout and install speed detectors. And what those are, there's a couple of different versions of this available on the market. I know that TCS makes one. And basically, it involves installing two locomotive detectors at different ends of a measured section of your layout. And then when the locomotive first crosses the first detector, it starts the process. And then when it hits the other detector, it stops it. And then the microprocessor calculates the speed that it took for that locomotive to cross through that measured length of track. And you just do that, the same thing at speed steps 1, speed step 64, and speed step 128, or 127. And that way, you can write down those speeds, compare them on the two locomotives, and then make minute adjustments, or the required adjustments, in the settings for speeds for CVs 2, 6, and 5. And those are the CVs, the configuration variables that control your speed at speed step 1, the midpoint speed, and the top speed. Okay, so that's CVs 2, 6, and 5. And yeah, I don't know why they decided to go 2, 6, and 5 as opposed to 2, 5, and 6, but that's the way the NMRA did it, so we have to live with it now 30 years later. And then you just go through the process over and over again, running the locomotives at different speeds through that measured section at the different speed steps, and then adjusting their relative speeds using the settings in CVs 2, 6, and 5. And that way you can eventually get to the point where they're running at the same speed. Now, I don't particularly like that approach simply because it requires installing a set of detectors in a measurable section on your layout. So it takes a while to get it set up and working, okay? Now, there is another method that I love, and it involves no work at all. You just take the device out of the box and you're ready to use it. And that is this AccuTrack 2 speedometer. And it works virtually the same way. Let's go ahead and take a look at how the AccuTrack 2 speedometer works before we get started. And let me point out up front that it's this particular model here is designed for use with N-scale and HO scale. And if you look right here, there's a little button that says Setup. And you just push that, and it allows you to set it up for a selection of either N-scale or HO scale. And you can also set it up for miles per hour or kilometers per hour. So how does this work? Well, you can see right here there's an on-off button. So I'm going to turn that on and we'll see what happens. It's lit up and it's saying HO and 87.1. So it's giving you HO scale. You can also see right now there's a little LED here blinking. Now that is saying that it's in ready mode waiting for a locomotive to come. Now, as soon as the locomotive enters from either end, and you can go in either direction and it's going to work. As soon as the locomotive enters the tunnel at either end, it breaks an optical detector path, just like the old electric eye door openers that you used to see in stores. And this LED here will go out, and one over here will come on solid. So that's how you know that this measurement process has begun. That's about all there is to it. It's very easy to work with, and you can, like I say, you can pick up this and move it to somewhere else on your layout. You can take it to the club and use it there. You can take it to a friend's layout and use it there. So the portability is really the great thing about this, and the fact that to install it, all you have to do is put it on your track and turn it on. You don't have to go drilling holes through your track and installing photo transistors and detectors of that kind in order to make it work on your layout. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works in real time. Okay, so I've got my first locomotive, number 6547, which is an Atlas product with a Loc sound decoder in it. we'll run it through on speed step 1 or 1% since this is a Digitrex throttle. And then we'll do it again at the midpoint speed, which will be 50%, and then we'll do it at 99% speed. At each point, we'll record the speed, and then we'll do it with the second locomotive, and we can make adjustments so they'll run at the same speed. So let me go ahead and turn it on. You can see it's coming up with HO, and we'll wait for the little dot LED to blink, and there it is. So I'm going to set it now for 1, and it's going to enter the tunnel. Okay, you can see the LED on the left has locked in solid now. That indicates that it is recording the speed now. Okay, we're running at 2.1 miles per hour. So let it go right on through and clear out, and then I'll run it back and we'll do it again, as I said, at 50% throttle. Okay, here it comes at 50% speed. .49 miles an hour. I've got the locomotive set up and running at 99% full throttle. And it came in at 104 for the top speed. So that's fairly close to a linear function. We've got something at 2 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and 104 miles an hour. So now let's put the other locomotive on the track and see what it does. Now this is essentially the same locomotive. It's another Atlas H1644 with a Loco sound decoder in it. So I'm following my own suggestions. I'm using essentially the same locomotive with the same decoder in it, programmed the same way. So let's see how it does on speed step 1, 1% of throttle. You can see now that the left LED has gone solid and locked in, so we're measuring the speed through the tunnel. This one looks a little bit slower. Yep, it came in at 1.9, but still, that's not bad. Let me back it up and we'll run it through at the mid-speed. I've got it set at 50% of full throttle, so let's see how she does. Locked in, and 50 miles an hour. Okay, let me back this up again, and we'll try it at full speed. So here comes the locomotive. It's doing full speed, 99%. And we get a speed of 103. So at this point, we have speeds of 2.1 miles per hour and 1.9 at the slowest speed, 1% of throttle, or speed step 1. We've got 49 and 50 at the midpoint, and 104 and 103 at the top of the speed curve. So I'm going to be happy with that. I think, the worst we've got is at the lowest speed, which are all, that's off by 0.2 of a mile per hour. Very, very negligible amount. So what I'm going to do now is pull both locomotives back here and remove the speedometer, and we'll hook them up, create a universal consist using my Digitrex throttle, and then we'll see how they operate together. Now, if I was not exactly happy, completely happy with any two speeds, say they were off by, 3, 4, 5 miles per hour, something like that, or even worse, then what I would do is go back and decrease the CV setting for that speed step, okay, enough to where I thought it was going to match the speed of the other locomotive. Then I would run it back through the speedometer again and see how close I came. And I would keep doing that until the two speeds matched. And I would do that at each one of the speed steps. The lowest, the midpoint, and the highest, using CVs 2, CV6, and CV5. Okay, what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and create a consist as I've shown you before in other videos, and I'll put a link to that here above me, but I'm going to MU both of them, and now they're ready to go. And I've left them spaced about 1 inch apart so you can see how well they're running together. Now, as you can see, the green locomotive is running just a little bit faster than the other one at the slowest speed, and that's why it's kind of taking off a little bit ahead of it and opening the distance between them. So I'm going to reduce its speed. It was at 2.1, whereas the other was at 1.9. So I'm going to cut it back some using ops mode programming, and I've shown you how to do that using your Digitrix throttles previously. So I'm just going to do it real quick, and we'll see how it's going to work. Okay, got them lined up, ready to go again. Let's see how that works. Okay, it's still a bit faster, isn't it? Now, part of the reason for that is with universal consisting, the top locomotive in the consist is always going to get the command first and take off before the other one does. And that's one of the problems with universal consisting and command station assisting. They're not both responding at exactly the same time. So I'm going to take it down to a value of 5. And we'll see how it's going to work this time. Let me separate them. And we'll give them a start. Okay, that's much better now. I've coupled the two locomotives together, so let's see how they operate coupled up. Okay, they're doing pretty good. No bumping and knocking of couplers, no jerking, anything like that. We'll run it back the other way. And I'm reasonably happy with that speed match. Now, you might be wondering why I've said nothing at all about running in reverse. Everything we've done so far has been with these locomotives running forward. So if you have another locomotive like these two here and you want them running with them facing in opposite directions, you would just go ahead, turn the other locomotive, say the black one, around so it's facing the other direction, run it through the speed matching process, and it would run that way fine. But what happens if you want to run the locomotives both in forward and reverse and have them speed matched perfectly? And what about the special 28-step speed tables that I never really talked about? Well, we're going to take a look at those in the next video next week. So come on back for that video on running in forward and reverse and making special adjustments for those kind of situations, and also how to use the 28-step speed tables that are much more complicated to set up, but I'm going to show you some tricks that can make it fairly easy to do. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. Now, for any of you who are interested in looking up some more information on the Accutrack 2 speedometers, I will try to find a website link or an email address and include that in the description to this video. And I can also almost guarantee you that if you take the time to look on eBay and do a search for Accutrack 2 speedometer, you'll find them for sale there. So take a look at that and have a great week. We'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC Guide. Bye now.